and every chain will break as broken hearts declare His praise. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him. So open up the gates, make way before the King of Kings. Our God who calls the saved is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him. Praise His name this morning. From our homes, from across the community, let's praise Him today. Let Him hear your voice.
Well, good morning. My name is Dean Ward, and I serve as the lead pastor of the River Church. And I am so grateful that you have chosen to join in with us here today. I want to just tell you a story that happened in the early days of the River. I was having my mentor, the most influential pastor in my life, who walked alongside of me when I was not a pastor and who God used to help process through my fears and resistance to being a pastor. And whenever I started the River Church, I had him in and invited him to speak to our people. And so I brought him on stage. We were up at Penn State, New Kensington. I introduced him, told everybody there the difference that Pastor Steve Childs made in my life, and just told a little bit of the story about that. And then I introduced him and asked him to say a few words. And I'll never forget the words he said. He walked up, took the microphone, and he said, "When you see a turtle sitting on a fence post, you know he didn't get there on his own." And I thought, that's the weirdest thing I ever heard. But 19 years later now, I get it. It was a brilliant saying that has stuck with me and caused me to title this sermon, "A Turtle on Top of a Fence Post." Because I am who I am today because of the people that have gone before me, that have elevated me. We are standing today in the Sardis Cemetery, where many of my ancestors are buried. I would like to introduce you to the tombstone of James and Sarah Rubright. James and Sarah were my great-grandparents, and they had 18 children, best as I can remember. And these children, my grandfather married Helen Rubright, who was my grandfather, James Tomer. He married Helen Rubright, and so the story goes. So every 4th of July, the Rubrights started getting together 111 years ago. And for the past 110 years, the Rubrights have gathered together for the Rubright reunion every 4th of July. It's never been a question for me from childhood through adulthood, what am I doing on the 4th of July? We're going to the Rubright reunion. Well, this past year, July 4th, we celebrated our 110th Rubright reunion on July 4th. And I've been notified, because of the fact that there are only 3 of the first cousins still alive, and the second and third cousins have not stayed connected in a way that is, really meaningful, that the numbers for our reunion have dwindled and dwindled. And so last year, the 110th Rubright reunion is the last reunion that we will be having. And so now, my July 4ths are wide open. Any suggestions, let me know. So today, we are celebrating on this Memorial Day weekend those who have gone before us, who have invested their lives in us. And specifically, we are honoring and celebrating the men and women who gave their lives in honor of the service of our country to ensure and defend our freedom. May this weekend is about so much more than just the hot dogs and hamburgers and cookouts and downtime and the fun that we have. This day that we celebrate, known as Memorial Day, has a number of different origin stories, but the most trustworthy ones show that it was begun in Columbus, Mississippi in 1966, when some people gathered together to lay wreaths on the graves of those who lost their lives in the Civil War. And they remembered. And then in 1971, the government of our country declared that this is a national holiday, and we celebrate it every year. But today, I want to call us back to the real reason that we celebrate this day. Today, we remember men and women who gave their lives. In our family, we remember specifically Lieutenant Colonel Jim English. This is my mother-in-law's brother, my wife's Uncle Jim, who on March 24th, 1979, as a reservist, was flying a jet across the country for his reserve unit, and the wings, the ailerons stopped working and they froze, and he ejected, and the reality was his flight was fitted with a parachute that was intended to deploy when it was ejected, and there was a recall on those almost a week earlier saying they're defective. Well, his plane had not been brought into compliance with that, and his parachute never opened. And on March 24th, 1979, near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Lieutenant Colonel Jim English, who was the commander at the Youngstown Air Reserve Base, lost his life in service of our country. In, I believe, 1981, there was a gymnasium dedicated to him at the base, and we, as a family, remember him more than every year, but especially on this weekend. I'm reminded of Frank Link, a prominent leader in our community, was the mayor of New Kensington for some time. When he was younger, his older brother, George, lost his life while serving with the Marines over in Vietnam. Perhaps the thousands of men and women who died serving their country, our country, since September 11th, 2001. Perhaps you have friends that were serving and never came home. The Gold Star parents and spouses, the children that have lost, or the Blue Star, is it Blue Star I meant, who've lost their family members. Our hearts go out to you, and we remember on this day. But there's another category of men and women who have served that we don't talk about much. And this may be a little emotional for me. Are the men and women who came home from the war and have since lost their life or taken their life because of the horrors of what they experienced over there. My next door neighbor, Andrew Jordan, served and then went back to do many other jobs in Iraq and Afghanistan, in the Middle East, and I was visiting with him just a couple years ago, and he said that he was going away for a little bit, for about a month. And I said, well, what? He said, for rehab. He said, I can't get control of my drinking. I'm an alcoholic and I can't win this battle, and I'm going to rehab. And so I said, do you suffer from PTSD? And he's like, scoffed at that question, and he said, every moment of every day. And less than a year after that conversation, he ended his life. And he gave his life in service of our country. And so, for those of you whose lives have been deeply touched by losing someone in service of our country, I want to say thank you for the honor that you carry on in your lives. Even though that void is there, you help carry on their legacy, and remembering helps us do that. And so may the Lord bless you this weekend as you remember. It's also a little emotional for me today because today's May 24th. And 21 years ago today, my dad was killed in a car accident. So just give me an umbrella of grace today, please, as I'm feeling things a little deeper, in a little more emotional way than normal. My sweat rag has now become my tear rag. So, I want to share with you words that Jesus said to his closest friends. They had shared a meal together, and Jesus knew what was ahead later that night. He knew that he was soon to be betrayed and would be taken from them, and they would find themselves lost and alone, rudderless, grieving in ways they couldn't imagine. And he had some very important words that he wanted to share with them. And I believe he said these words to them that we have recorded in John chapter 15, verse 13, to help them better understand what was taking place and exactly what he was doing for them and for us. Jesus told them, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And I'm certain that Jesus wanted them to know the extent of his love, that he was not being hauled away and losing his life as a victim, but he was laying down his life for them, his friends, and for us. This depth of love is profound. This depth of love requires sacrifice and surrender. There's this great story in Samuel of King David. He's throughout his life, he has these great battles with the Philistines. You probably remember David and Goliath when he was a young boy. Well, this is later as he was king. He was in a cave, and the Philistines were, trying to conquer him. And he had his mighty men, his warriors with him, 3 of them. And I just want to read to you the extent and the depth of their love for him and the sacrifice that they made for their king. It says 3, beginning at verse 13, 3 of the 30 chief warriors came down to David at the cave, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So David's craving in his soul water from a well in Bethlehem, which is behind enemy lines. The Philistines controlled that region, and they had a garrison. I don't know how many people were in a garrison, but it was a lot. They had a garrison there. Verse 16. It says, "So the three mighty warriors broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David." That's love that requires sacrifice. They risked everything to honor their king and to fulfill the wish that their king had spoken out loud, not even assuming that anybody would take action on it. But then David, he was so moved by this that listen to what he did. It says, he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out before the Lord. You're like, why would he do this? Well, in the Jewish religious tradition, whenever somebody would make a significant sacrifice, they would take the cup and pour it out in front of the altar. It was called a drink offering. And it was involved at different times in their rhythm of worship. Well, David is honoring them and saying, "I will honor you and show my love for you by sacrificing this gift as an offering and pouring it out." He said in verse 17, "Far be it from me, Lord, to do this," he said. "Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives?" And David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the three mighty warriors. David lived with the realization and the humility of the men that were willing to sacrifice their lives for the greater good. And so I just want to pause and ask you, who has sacrificed in your life in a way that has touched you deeply? Who, according to my friend and mentor Steve Childs, has elevated you up on a fence post as a turtle? Who put you up there? Who gave of themselves? Who loved you so deeply that they sacrificed for you, that they surrendered things for you? My mom sacrificed significantly in my life, and she loved to give to me. And my mother and father, for sure, are at the top of this list. But I was so immature and ignorant and a stupid young kid, I thought it was about me. I thought the gifts, I thought I was to be the end user, the consumer of those gifts. And it took my mother's passing in 2013 to open my eyes that it's not about me. It's about passing on this to others. And so my wife and I were just noting the joy that we feel in our soul now when we give gifts, and the amazing joy that we feel when we sacrifice to bless someone else. And so I want to ask you, who in your life has sacrificed so that you are elevated higher than you would have been otherwise. Hey, I want to invite us just to pause and enjoy this video this Memorial Day that is just simply called Memorial Day. We honor you. Let's enjoy this video together.
To the brave men and women who stood up for freedom, who answered the call and fought for our nation, who paid the ultimate price and never came back. To the American soldier, we thank you. To the mothers and fathers who raised a hero, to the brothers and sisters with an empty space, to the sons and daughters who have only memories, to the wives and husbands who bear the void with pride, to all who've lost a soldier they love. No gift could repay your sacrifice. No tribute could match our admiration. No word can contain our gratitude, but still, it deserves to be said. We remember you, we salute you, and we honor you today.
Well, again, thank you to all who served, all who lost those they loved in service of our country. We love and appreciate you. Okay, so enough tears for just a few minutes, okay? I wanted to film the second part of the message in front of this monument here in the Sardis Cemetery. Now, this monument is dedicated to Corporal Murray by William Miller. Let me read you what the dedication says. It says, "To perpetuate the heroism of those from this community," like this Sardis community, who risked their lives that this nation under God should have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people should not perish from the earth. Now, this monument on each sides of the pillar here has 130 names of all the members of this community who had heroism by serving from 1861 to 1865 during the Civil War. Now, on top of this monument is a Union soldier. And what is fascinating about this Union soldier was up until just a few years ago, this Union soldier's back was turned toward the cemetery. It was the oddest thing. You would come up here and see the beautiful cemetery, and this soldier with his back turned toward the tombstones. And it was like, why is that? That's so weird. Well, I came to learn that this church over here that has since become a home was on a separate parcel, but this church, this was their cemetery. There's I think almost 20 Civil War veterans buried here in this cemetery. And the monument was erected with the soldier greeting you when you walked from the church into the cemetery. So you were greeted by the soldier. But the parcels were separated. The church property was sold. The cemetery remained as the Sardis Cemetery. And so a few years ago, they brought a crane up here, strapped it on the Union soldier, raised him up, rotated him 180 degrees, and set him back down. So now he is facing the cemetery. Now, you probably didn't want to know that. But I found that fascinating and just wanted to share that with you. Love requires sacrifice and surrender. The second thing I want to point out to us today is that impact requires sacrifice and surrender. All of us have this desire in our life. It was given to us, implanted in our soul by God to make an impact, to make a difference. Now, a lot of things may have covered that up, that desire up in our lives over the years, and part of my calling as a pastor is to help unearth that desire and calling that God placed in each of our souls to make a difference. But if we have dreams of making a difference, if we want our lives to matter, if we want to make an impact, it will require sacrifice and surrender. One of my favorite experiences every year is our annual car show at the river. And last Sunday, we hosted our 18th annual car show. And it was the smoothest car show we've ever had. Every team was led well. The grounds team, the admin team, the food team, the grill team, the kids zone team, the door prize team. Every team was led well, and so many people pitched in. If you would have come, you would have seen scores and scores of people in their blue shirts from the river, just wanting to serve and be helpful and wanting to build relationships with people that don't go to church. And it was a great day. And it, over the last 18 years, has made an impact and continues to. But it doesn't come with an unwillingness to serve. It comes with each of us coming with our hands open saying, how can we serve? Not our arm extended saying, hey, come serve me. I love the way Paul says in Philippians 2:17, hearkening back to King David pouring out the drink. The Apostle Paul says, but even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. The Apostle Paul is saying, hey, even though I'm pouring out my life, it's as a sacrifice and surrender, it's such a joy to me. He echoes this sentiment in Acts chapter 20, verse 24, when he says, however, I consider my life worth nothing to me. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task the Lord Jesus has given me, the task of testifying to the good news of God's grace. If you want to have impact, if you want to make a difference, it requires sacrifice and surrender. And the last thing I want to point out is that legacy. Legacy requires sacrifice and surrender. James and Sarah Rubright have lived a legacy. My great-grandparents, they had 18 descendants, scores of first cousins, and a heritage and legacy of faith and hard work that has outlived them. For the coward, there is no life. For the hero, there is no death. Legacy requires sacrifice and surrender. My mother loved this quote by Hunter S. Thompson. Now, this is how my mother lived her life, and this is how she wanted to be remembered. And this describes my mother in amazing accuracy. It says, quote, "My life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, 'Wow, what a ride!'" You know, when I just a little side note, my mother would probably kill me for saying this, but when I love this part when he says, it's not the intention to arrive safely in a pretty and well-preserved body. After my dad died and my mother had received some of the life insurance money, she had a friend that had some plastic surgery done. She was in her 60s and wanted to look maybe a little younger, and she went to a plastic surgeon and just casually asked him, "Could you do a little bit for me?" And he looked at her and said, "Oh, I could do a lot for you." But to my mother's credit, I was so proud of her. She said, "You know what? I don't want to end my life in a pretty well-preserved body. I want to go out blazing." And those of you that know my mother, it's exactly how she went out. The Apostle Paul said in 2 Timothy 4:6, he says, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure is near." Now, the interesting thing is we celebrate the sacrifice of all those men and women who died in service of our country. But here's the reality. We will all die one day. We all will. Unless the Lord comes back before we die, we will all face the inevitability of death. And what legacy do you want to leave? What impact do you want to have? It starts by looking at those who impacted you and taking that as motivation, like, I got to do this for others. I have to leave a legacy, not for me, but for all those who come after me. So I just want to ask, who are you elevating onto fence posts? Amen. God bless you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in with us here today, and I can't wait till I get to see you again next Sunday. Have a great and safe holiday weekend. God bless you all.